This is The Guardian.
I'm Bridie Jabour, coming to you from Gadigal land. And this is Who Cared? The disappearance of Amber Haigh.
It's Monday morning and it's cold in Wagga Wagga. I'm walking along the banks of the Murrumbidgee River towards the old courthouse in the middle of town. And I'm here for a trial that's been 2 decades to bring before a court.
For the next few weeks, we're going to be bringing you a special series, reporting on a case before the Supreme Court of New South Wales.
Amber Haigh was a young mother of a 5-month-old boy when she went missing in June of 2002. There's been no trace of her found ever since.
The last people to say they saw her alive are now charged with her murder. They both plead not guilty.
Robert Samuel Jeeves and Anne Margaret Jeeves, both 64, each face 1 count of murder for killing Amber Haigh. Amber Haigh was living at their house and was in a sexual relationship with Robert Jeeves. Robert Jeeves was the father of Amber Haigh's son.
The Jeeves say they drove Amber to Campbelltown railway station so she could visit her sick father. They told police she had left her 5-month-old son in their custody. A fortnight later, in June 2002, the Jeeves reported Amber missing. She was 19 years old.
In 2011, a coroner said Amber Haigh was dead. She died by homicidal misadventure. But he couldn't take it any further as to who was responsible. Now, in 2024, 22 years after Amber Haigh disappeared, there's finally a trial over her murder.
In the decades since, the enduring mystery has attracted the attention of the media and the public. The trial of her murder is now in its 2nd week. It's Saturday, the 29th of June.
I'm standing outside Wagga Wagga's courthouse, a red brick Federation-era building right in the middle of town. It's on the main street. A predecessor court that stood on this site tried one James Kelly, younger brother of Ned, for stealing 2 horses. And the most dramatic thing about the courthouse is the red brick bell tower that sort of looms over the whole town and chimes out the hours on the hour.
Ben, for the past 2 weeks, you've been in Wagga Wagga reporting on this case in front of the Supreme Court. What's that been like?
It's been an emotional and, at times, very intense 2 weeks. This is obviously an immensely traumatic case for a lot of people still after 22 years. And it has been a long time coming. This has been more than 2 decades since Amber Haigh disappeared without trace for it finally to come to court in the form of this murder trial. And even after all that time, we still had more delays. Everybody came to court 2 weeks ago to discover one of the co-accused wasn't in court. Anne Jeeves was unwell, had been in hospital, and initially they didn't know where within Corrections New South Wales she was. She couldn't be found. The judge was very unhappy with this trial not being able to start. So we had a delay of 3 or 4 days until we were able to get back to court to begin. And since then, we've heard from 11 witnesses. We've heard from family members of Amber Haigh. We've heard from neighbours. We've heard from health professionals who came into contact with her. All of the witnesses we've heard so far have been for the prosecution.
And 22 years, that's such a long time. Why has it taken this long to get to court?
This has been an enduring mystery in the Riverina of New South Wales. This has been the subject of a great deal of reportage and speculation. It's been the subject of gossip and innuendo in the towns where she lived in Young and Harden and Kingsvale. This has been the subject of a coronial inquiry in 2011. But we've finally seen it come to court now. In 2022, the reward for information leading to a conviction for over Amber Haigh's disappearance was raised from $100,000 to $1 million. And 8 days later, Robert Jeeves and Anne Jeeves were arrested. Now, it's important to note there is no body in this case. This is a circumstantial case. There's no body, there's very little forensic evidence about the last moments of Amber Haigh's life. A new witness or witnesses have come forward, and we're yet to hear from those. We've also heard that there were telephone intercepts and listening devices that gathered conversations between Robert and Anne Jeeves in 2002. That material was transcribed at the time, but we've also heard that it's been since retranscribed and significant discrepancies have been found. Entire conversations, in fact, the court heard, were completely missed the first time around. And we've heard in court, it's been foreshadowed, that this evidence will be fiercely contested. Inside, Anne Jeeves dresses for court in a blue jacket and black pants each day. She wears a hearing loop to assist in hearing witnesses from across the cavernous courtroom. Robert Jeeves appears in a green prison-issue tracksuit. They're brought into court separately from the holding cells downstairs. They sit beside each other in the dock, but there's little interaction between them, an occasional quiet word or a look, a raised eyebrow. But for the most part, they're impassive, save for Robert Jeeves occasionally scribbling notes in a small notebook.
So let's go back to the very beginning of this trial. What were the opening arguments?
We've heard opening arguments from both sides. The prosecution argues that Amber Haigh was used by Robert and Anne Jeeves effectively as a surrogate mother because they wanted another baby. And once Haigh's baby was born, fathered by Robert Jeeves, they sought to have her, in the words of the prosecution, removed from the equation. And so they killed her. That son that Amber Haigh gave birth to is still alive, but there are legal restrictions, meaning that we're not allowed to name him or identify him. The prosecution argued in court that it was always the intention of the Jeeves to assume custody and care of that baby that Amber Haigh had to Robert Jeeves. But when it became apparent that Amber Haigh wasn't going to give up that baby to them or to anybody else, they realised, in the words of the Crown, a more fundamental action was needed. So they killed her. The case that the prosecution is bringing, they concede, is circumstantial. There is no body, there's very little forensic evidence. What they argue is this is a strands of the cable case, that there are these individual threads of evidence that collectively will prove beyond reasonable doubt the guilt of the Jeeves in killing Amber Haigh. The defence argument, Robert and Anne Jeeves are separately represented, but both of their lawyers have argued that the case against them is deeply flawed and there is simply no evidence linking either of them to the disappearance of Amber Haigh. Kingsvale is a small place. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody is aware of everybody's histories. And it is a place, the court's heard, where there was significant gossip and innuendo around the Jeeves. There was community distaste at Robert Jeeves' relationship with Amber Haigh, this much younger woman, a woman with intellectual disabilities, and this fuelled gossip and innuendo. People in the town had axes to grind against Robert Jeeves and the Jeeveses more generally. And so everything they did, the defence argues, was viewed through a haze of mistrust and suspicion. But the defence argues there is no evidence that the Jeeves killed Amber Haigh and that can't be proved in court. And they say that what's being put before the court is relying on people's fading and degraded memories of events that happened more than 20 years ago.
And what about Amber? What have we heard in court about the type of person that she was?
The first person to talk about Amber Haigh in court was her mother, Rosalind Wright. She described her daughter as bubbly and kind-hearted, but said she'd struggled at school because in her words, it took her longer to learn things. She said she was always wanting to help out, she always wanted to be around, and she was kind-hearted and considerate, but she conceded her daughter could be very easily misled. She was naive and prone to exploitation. She said her daughter wasn't a leader, she was a follower. The court heard that Amber had had a difficult upbringing. She'd moved around a lot. She had an abusive and violent, at times, relationship with her father. And it was thought that moving to the country, moving to Kingsvale, where she could find some stability, where she could perhaps find some work, picking cherries, picking fruit, might give her the chance to sort of build a stable environment and a stable life around her. She moved as a teenager to Kingsvale to live with her great aunt. Her great aunt, Stella Nealon, was also called to give evidence to the court. She said Amber loved living in the country. She loved the big country house, but there were difficulties there too. At 14, Amber fell pregnant to a cousin who was also living in Stella Nealon's house. That pregnancy was terminated. And we heard in court that Stella Nealon felt a degree of embarrassment, of shame that had happened under her roof when she was caring for Amber. Stella Nealon's cross-examination was an example of what the defence is arguing, that people's memories of what happened has degraded over time, and Stella was in the witness box a lot longer than anybody expected her to be, and At times, it was really confusing to follow what was going on and what she remembered and the order in which things had happened. And I think you only have to imagine your own memories of things that have happened in the past too. The order of things get mixed up, or who says what, or when things happen can be really difficult to remember. Courtrooms are intimidating places, and being asked to recall traumatic events from 2 decades ago is really going to stretch a lot of the witnesses in this trial. And this is going to be key to how this trial progresses.
And so going back to Amber, what happened after that first pregnancy?
Amber met a boy her age who lived next door, a boy by the name of Robbie Jeeves, who's the son of Robert Jeeves. And they struck up a friendship. They went to TAFE together. Robbie was a witness. He came to court and testified on Wednesday. It's Wednesday evening. We're out of court and it feels like we can finally exhale again. It's been an extraordinary day of evidence in this trial and an incredibly tense day. Robbie Jeeves is the only living child of Robert and Anne Jeeves. He's a man of about 40, and he arrived in court this morning in a black suit and aviator sunglasses. He's a tall, broad-shouldered man. We have to remember, Robbie Jeeves is a witness for the prosecution in this case. He's been called as a prosecution witness in the murder trial of his mother and his father. And what we heard about was that Amber then begins a sexual relationship, not with him, but with his father, and she moved in with the Jeeves. And Robbie talked about this irreparable rupture that this caused in his family. And incredibly sadly, this estrangement continues to this day. Robbie gave his evidence in court and then he chose to sit in the public gallery of the court. And over all the hours he was there, he did not once look towards his parents, a bare few feet away from him as they were sitting in the dock, or even acknowledge they were there. And this was clearly distressing for Anne Jeeves. She's been largely impassive throughout this trial, but she wiped tears from her eyes and looked towards her son repeatedly.
We'll be right back. You've said that the Crown are alleging at the core of their case is the allegation that the Jeeves used Amber as a surrogate mother. What have we heard about Amber's relationship with the Jeeves?
It was a very complex and very tempestuous relationship, has been the evidence that's been led by these prosecution witnesses before court. Amber Haigh, again, was a very naive young woman and was seen as someone, certainly externally, as potentially being exploited by the Jeeves. The Jeeves had a child together, Robbie. They'd also had several miscarriages and a stillborn baby. We've heard from 4 witnesses so far in this trial that the Jeeves had expressly said they had wanted another baby. Amber Haigh gave birth to Robert Jeeves's baby in January of 2002. Anne Jeeves, who's still living at the home with both Amber and Robert Jeeves, is pleading with her son Robbie to accept this new baby as her brother. But he declines. He says it's not right, and ultimately this leads to his estrangement from his parents. He told the court his mother wanted him to go into the hospital. She said, "You've got a baby brother in there." He said, "No, I don't. She was my ex-girlfriend. You can't have a baby brother to your ex-girlfriend." There was an extraordinary incident that was explored in some detail in court when Anne Jeeves appeared at Robbie Jeeves's home in the middle of the night carrying this new baby, this newborn baby. He didn't want to let her in, but it was cold outside. He didn't want this baby outside, so he invited his mother in, and his mother urged him to hold this baby, to accept this baby and acknowledge it as his brother, and he refused to do that. And Anne Jeeves reportedly said to him, "Haven't you ever heard of a surrogate mother?" Robbie Jeeves also told the court his father was there that night. He was outside and threatened to throw a chair through his window. This was a threat that wasn't followed through with, but was of sufficient concern to Robbie Jeeves to take out an AVO against his own father. A number of other prosecution witnesses have said that they heard and they believe that Anne Jeeves wanted to take this baby from Amber Haigh. Stella Nealon, Amber's great aunt, said that Anne Jeeves treated Haigh roughly and talked nasty to her. And Nealon alleged that Anne Jeeves told Amber Haigh, "If you don't look after the baby, you'll lose it. I'll take it."
You mentioned in the defence's openings, they were talking about rumours, innuendo in this small town, and people all too quick to point the finger. What have we heard about that?
We've heard a lot about this, and this is emerging as a key element of the Jeeves defence, that there is no evidence linking them in any way to the disappearance of Amber Haigh. What we have is rumour and innuendo and people who didn't like the Jeeves for a number of reasons alleging they're behind her disappearance. We've had reference, and a lot of it's been quite oblique in court, to Robert Jeeves' criminal history. Stella Nealon talked about this under cross-examination from Anne Jeeves' lawyer. She told the court she'd heard from people in the district rumours about Robert Jeeves allegedly tying up a young girl on his property, but she said she had no first-hand knowledge of the allegation. She said, "That was the story going around, that he tied up 2 girls, school children. I wasn't going to question that because it's none of my business." Those references to Robert Jeeves' criminal history haven't been further explored in this trial yet. And then we heard further testimony late on Thursday afternoon, right in the last moment of the week's testimony, from a former family health counsellor. One of her medical reports was read into evidence.
And what did she say about her experiences with Amber?
Emma Baldock was taken to a report she wrote in March of 2002. March 2002 is the first couple of months of Amber's son's life. It's also ultimately the last few months of Amber's life. She had a counselling session with Amber Haigh, and her notes from that session were read into court. One of the things she says about Amber Haigh is that, in my opinion, she would have difficulty in understanding the difference between love and exploitation. I believe she would therefore have trouble protecting her own child. The court heard in this evidence that the baby was conceived when Amber Haigh and Robert Jeeves were drunk, and that Anne Jeeves was angry about Amber's pregnancy because Amber was still on her anti-epileptic medication. The court heard that Anne Jeeves allegedly told Amber to terminate that pregnancy and then to fall pregnant again to Robert when she wasn't on her daily epilepsy medication. Of course, when Amber Haigh is allegedly telling this to Emma Baldock, she has her baby. Her baby is a couple of months old, and she's learning to care for this child. Amber tells Emma Baldock, she says, if Anne Jeeves and Robert Jeeves try to get her son from her because they want the baby, she'll tell them to back off. Emma Baldock hasn't finished her evidence. She'll come back to court at another time for cross-examination and re-examination. Court has risen, and the trial is poised at an acute moment. Much of the evidence is focused at a primary level about Amber Haigh as a young woman finding her way in the world, her background, her history, her family relationships, the way she was living her life, and the struggles she was having. And the picture that's painted is that of a vulnerable, lost young woman.
That was Guardian Australia reporter Ben Doherty. You can read all of his reporting on the Amber Haigh murder trial at theguardian.com. He'll be in court every day. This episode was produced by Joe Koning, who also did the sound design. The executive producer is Miles Martignoni. We'll be back with another episode every Monday from July 8 in the Full Story feed.